I'm Clara, 31, female, and my life was systematically dismantled because my husband became obsessed with my birthday gift, lost his job, and then blamed me for the catastrophic fallout. It sounds like a bizarre, unbelievable headline, but it was my reality for 6 agonizing months. The foundation of our marriage, our financial security, and our future were all pulverized by a single piece of jewelry, a gaudy, ostentatious necklace that was never even meant for him. But looking back, the necklace wasn't the cause, it was just the catalyst. The cracks in our foundation were already there, puttied over with my patience and his casual disregard, and it only took one heavy, ugly emerald to bring the whole structure crashing down. To understand how a man like Leo, a meticulous financial analyst who ironed his socks and organized our pantry by food group, could unravel so completely, you have to understand his relationship with his mother, Alina. Their bond wasn't just close, it was suffocating. Alina didn't see a son, she saw an extension of herself. And Leo, despite his professional success and outward confidence, was still a little boy inside, desperate for her approval. I existed as a supporting character in the grand drama of their relationship, a necessary but ultimately secondary figure. I remember one of our first major disagreements just a year into our marriage. We had just bought our first home, a cozy little bungalow that needed some cosmetic work. I had spent weeks creating mood boards, picking out paint swatches, and dreaming of the warm, modern space we would build together. I went away for a 3-day work conference, and when I came back, the living room was a completely different color. Not just a different color, but a shade of mustard yellow so aggressive it felt like it was yelling at you. All our furniture had been rearranged. In the center of the room, on a new, ornate rug that looked like it belonged in a palace, sat Alina sipping tea. "What do you think, dear?" she'd said, beaming. It needed a woman's touch, a more experienced woman's touch. I was speechless. I looked at Leo, expecting him to be just as horrified to defend me, to defend us. Instead, he just shrugged, a sheepish grin on his face. Mom got a burst of inspiration. It's a little bright, but it's growing on me. She worked so hard, Clara. I didn't want to cause a scene. I tried to explain calmly that this was our home, a place we were supposed to build together. I had plans we had discussed. His response cut me to the quick. "They're just plans, Clara. My mom did us a huge favor. Don't be ungrateful." Ungrateful, that became the word used to silence me whenever Alina overstepped. We ended up living with that mustard yellow living room for 2 years before I finally put my foot down and repainted it while Leo and his mother were on their annual mother-son retreat. Leo was annoyed, but I stood firm and he eventually dropped it. However, the incident taught me a valuable lesson. In Leo's world, his mother's feelings and actions would always be prioritized over mine. Another time, about 2 years ago, I hosted a dinner party for my boss and a few senior colleagues. It was a huge opportunity for me, a chance to make a good impression outside the office. I spent 2 days cooking. I am a decent cook, but I'm not a chef. I was nervous but proud of the meal I'd prepared. Alina, who had invited herself over to help, walked around the kitchen, inspecting my dishes like a health inspector. In the middle of dinner, right as my boss was complimenting the beef bourguignon, Alina let out a little sigh. "It's lovely, Clara, dear, a bit salty for my taste, but a good effort." She then turned to my boss. "Leo is used to my cooking, you see, his palate is quite refined." She patted Leo's hand. "Isn't that right, darling?" Leo, instead of defending my cooking or just changing the subject, nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, Mom's right, it is a little salty, but still good, honey," he said, giving me a thumbs up as if he were doing me a favor. I felt my face flush with humiliation. The rest of the dinner was a blur of me trying to salvage the conversation, my confidence shattered. My boss, a kind woman, later told me the food was delicious and to ignore the comment, but the damage was done. Leo hadn't just failed to support me, he had actively sided with his mother in undermining me in front of people who were important to my career. These weren't isolated incidents, they were a pattern. Alina would offer suggestions that were actually commands. She would give us gifts that came with unspoken expectations. She would criticize my choices in a soft, concerned tone that made me feel like the villain if I objected. And through it all, Leo would act as her willing accomplice, smoothing things over, making excuses, and asking me to be the one who compromised, the one who understood, the one who was not ungrateful. I loved him, and in every other aspect of our lives, he was a kind, attentive partner. so I learned to navigate the treacherous waters of his family dynamic. I built walls around certain parts of my life to protect them from Aliner's influence, and I accepted that on this one topic, my husband was hopelessly blind. I just never imagined that his blindness would lead us into a financial and emotional abyss from which we might never escape. My 31st birthday began like any other special occasion in our home, with a quiet, loving start. Leo made me my favorite breakfast, pancakes with fresh strawberries, and gave me a thoughtful, perfect gift, a set of high-end noise-canceling headphones I'd been wanting for months for when I needed to focus on my design work. "So you can tune out the world," he'd said with a kiss, "even me." It was sweet, and it was us. For a few hours, I forgot about the impending arrival of his mother and the grand, performative celebration she insisted on hosting for me that evening. Elena didn't do small gatherings. For her, my birthday was an excuse to showcase her generosity and her central role in our lives. Our house filled up quickly with a smattering of our friends and a larger contingent of her own friends and distant relatives of Leo's whom I barely knew. Elena floated through the party, the gracious host in a home that wasn't hers, accepting compliments on her party for her daughter. I just smiled and played my part. The moment came after we cut the cake. Elena clinked a glass for attention, her face arranged in an expression of benevolent importance. "Now for the real gift," she announced, silencing the room. She produced a long, velvet box. It was a deep royal blue and looked heavy. "Clara, dear, as you know, our family has a long and storied history. I believe in tradition, and I believe in keeping precious things within the family." She opened the box with a flourish. Lying on a bed of white satin was the most ostentatious piece of jewelry I had ever seen in person. It was a gold chain, not delicate and tasteful, but thick and heavy like something a pirate king would wear. From it hung a pendant, a massive, uncut emerald the size of a large grape. It was a murky, dark green, held in place by a claw-like gold setting. It was garish, overwhelming, and utterly not my style. A collective gasp went through the room, a mix of genuine awe at the perceived value and, I suspect, some shock at the sheer gaudiness of the piece. I felt a plastic smile freeze on my face. "Elena, it's wow," I managed to say. "It belonged to my great-grandmother," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "It is a symbol of our family's strength and resilience. It's for you, of course, for your birthday." Then she added the line that would change everything. "It's a family piece meant to be kept close to protect the wearer." She looked pointedly at Leo as she said it, a strange, intense gleam in her eye. Leo, who was standing beside me, looked hypnotized. He wasn't looking at me or his mother, but at the necklace itself. His eyes were wide, and he seemed completely captivated. "Thank you, Elena. It's very generous," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I knew I would never wear it. It would live in its velvet box at the back of my closet, another one of Elena's symbolic intrusions stored away. My friends knew me well enough to see the discomfort on my face, but Elena's crowd was effusive. "Oh, you are so lucky. What a magnificent piece." I felt like an actress in a play I hadn't rehearsed for. After the party, as we were cleaning up, Leo couldn't stop talking about it. "Can you believe the size of that stone, Clara? Mom must have paid a fortune to have it reset in that chain." "It's certainly something," I said, trying to sound neutral. "Can I see it again?" he asked, his voice boyish and eager. I reluctantly retrieved the velvet box. He lifted the necklace out, its weight surprising him. He held it up to the light, his reflection staring back at him from the polished gold. "Wow," he whispered. Then he did something strange. He draped it around his own neck. The heavy chain settled awkwardly over his shirt collar. He walked over to the hallway mirror and stared at himself. It looked absurd, a parody of wealth and power. I expected him to laugh and take it off. He didn't. He just stood there, turning his head from side to side, a slow, strange smile spreading across his face. "It feels heavy," he said, but he didn't mean the weight. "It feels important." "It looks ridiculous, Leo," I said, trying to make it a joke. "Come on, take it off before you decide to become a rapper." He laughed, but it was a forced sound. He looked at himself for another full minute, an unreadable expression in his eyes. He finally took it off, placing it carefully back in the box. "She said it was to protect the wearer," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "A family piece." That night, as we lay in bed, I thought about the strangeness of the moment. It was just a weird, fleeting fascination, I told myself. He was impressed by the value caught up in his mother's dramatic presentation. By morning, he would have forgotten all about it. It was just an ugly necklace. It had no power, it was just an object. I fell asleep reassuring myself of that fact, completely unaware that the object was already starting to work its strange, toxic magic on the man lying beside me. My prediction that Leo would forget about the necklace was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. The next morning, I found him in the living room, already dressed for work in his crisp suit and tie with the monstrous gold and emerald chain hanging over his shirt. The sight was so jarring, so utterly incongruous with the man I knew that I actually laughed. Very funny, I said, waiting for the punchline. Are you going to a costume party I don't know about? Leo didn't crack a smile. He adjusted the pendant, centering it on his chest. I'm just getting a feel for it, he said defensively. It's a powerful piece of jewelry, Clara. You can feel the history in it. Leo, it's an accessory, not a historical artifact, and it's my accessory technically, I reminded him gently. Please take it off, you're going to be late for work. He sighed, a long, dramatic sound of exasperation that was usually reserved for when I asked him to take out the recycling. He reluctantly took it off, but his eyes followed the necklace as I placed it back in its box on our dresser. The rest of the morning was tense. He was quiet, withdrawn, and I felt a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. That evening, when I came home from work, he was wearing it again, this time over a simple t-shirt as he cooked dinner. It looked even more ludicrous in a casual setting. We need to talk about the necklace, Leo, I said, setting my bag down. What's there to talk about? He asked, not looking at me. It's in the house, I'm wearing it, what's the big deal? The big deal is that it's weird, you're becoming obsessed with it. It's not yours and you look, well, you don't look like yourself. He finally turned to face me, his expression hardening. My mother gave it to us, to the family. She said it was to protect the wearer. Maybe I need protecting. Maybe I want to feel that connection to my family's strengths. This was new. Leo had never been one for sentimentality or mystical beliefs. He was a man of numbers, of logic, of spreadsheets and projections. This talk of strength and protection was coming from a place I didn't recognize. You are strong, Leo. You don't need a piece of jewelry to prove that, I pleaded. And it was a birthday gift for me. And you were just going to let it rot in a box? He shot back, his voice rising. You don't appreciate it. You don't appreciate the history or what it means to my mother. Someone should wear it, someone who understands its value. The argument went in circles, ending with him storming off to the bedroom and me eating a plate of now cold pasta alone in the kitchen. The ugly necklace had become a third person in our marriage, a silent, glittering guest who was slowly pushing me out. The following Monday was the day the obsession breached the walls of our home and marched into his professional life. I came out of the shower to see him standing in front of the mirror, fully dressed in his best suit, adjusting the gold chain so it sat prominently over his tie. My heart sank. Leo, no, you cannot be serious. You can't wear that to work. Why not? He challenged, his jaw set stubbornly. Because you're a financial analyst at one of the most conservative firms in the city, there's a dress code. That is not in the dress code. It's unprofessional. People will think you're a joke. Let them, he scoffed. I'm one of the top performers in my division. My work speaks for itself. This is about my heritage. It has sentimental value. They can't tell me not to wear it. Yes, they can. They absolutely can. I was practically begging now. I could see the crash coming, like watching a car drive toward a cliff in slow motion. Please, Leo, for me, for us, don't do this. Don't throw away your reputation over a necklace. His face twisted into a look of bitter disappointment, but it wasn't directed at himself. It was directed at me. I thought you, of all people, would support me, my own wife, but you're just like them, you don't get it. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out the door, the emerald pendant swinging slightly with each determined step. I stood there in the middle of our bedroom, feeling a sense of dread so profound it was almost paralyzing. The man I married, the logical, pragmatic, ambitious man, had just walked out the door. In his place was a stranger, a man willing to risk everything for a piece of metal and stone given to him by his mother. I didn't know who this man was. ND, for the first time in our marriage, I was truly afraid of what he was going to do next. The first sign of official trouble came less than a week after Leo started wearing the necklace to work. He came home one evening, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He slammed his briefcase down on the kitchen table with enough force to make the fruit bowl jump. "Can you believe the nerve of these people?" he seethed, wrenching the necklace off and tossing it onto the counter. The heavy gold clattered loudly, an angry sound in our quiet kitchen. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I already knew. "HR, they called me in for a friendly chat," he said, using air quotes. Brenda from HR, with her fake smile and her clipboard, she said my statement jewelry was not in line with the company's professional dress code. My heart, which had been lodged in my throat, sank back into my chest with a painful thud. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to choose my words carefully. "So, what did you say? Did you tell them you de-stop wearing it?" Leo laughed, a short, humorless bark. "Of course not. I told her it was a family heirloom. I told her it had deep sentimental value and was connected to my heritage. I told her they were discriminating against my personal expression." "Leo, it's not a religious artifact. It's not a cultural symbol. It's a gaudy necklace your mom gave me for my birthday." I couldn't keep the exasperation out of my voice. "This is exactly what I was worried about. This is their first warning. You have to listen to them." "Listen to them? Clara, you should have been there. I was defending our family's honor. And you want me to just roll over?" He looked at me with such genuine betrayal, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "I thought you'd be proud of me for standing up for myself." The conversation was impossible. It was like arguing with a wall. His reality had detached from mine, floating away into some strange stratosphere where he was a noble warrior fighting for his family's legacy, and his company's HR department was the villain. I tried a different tactic. The next day, I called a leaner. I hated doing it. It felt like admitting defeat, like I was a child tattling to a parent, but I was desperate. "A leaner," I began, trying to sound calm and not accusatory. "I'm a bit worried about Leo and about the necklace you gave me." I explained the situation, how he was wearing it to work, the warning from HR, his refusal to listen to reason. I was hoping for a sliver of maternal concern, a moment of, "Oh dear, that's not what I intended at all. Let me talk to him." Instead, I was met with a chilly defense of her son. "Well, Clara, I don't see the problem," she said, her tone laced with disapproval. "My son is a brilliant man. If his company can't appreciate an employee who values family tradition, then perhaps it's not the right company for him. He's standing up for what he believes in. You should be supporting him, not trying to undermine him." She was siding with him. Of course she was. In her eyes, Leah was defending the sanctity of her gift and, by extension, her. The necklace was no longer just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of loyalty, and I was on the wrong side. The call ended with her telling me, in no uncertain terms, that I needed to be a more supportive wife. 2 weeks later, Leo came home with a sealed envelope, a written warning. It detailed the dress code policy, the date of his verbal warning, and stated in cold, corporate language that continued noncompliance would result in further disciplinary action, up to and including termination. I read the letter and felt physically ill. "This is it, Leo. This is the final warning," I said, holding the paper out to him. His hands were shaking slightly. "They are not bluffing. You will lose your job, our life, our home, our future. It's all tied to your career. You can't do this." He took the letter, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it in the trash. "They're trying to intimidate me," he said, his voice low and trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "They think I'll just back down. They don't know who I am." But I knew he was a man who, until a month ago, followed every rule. A man who was now so deep in his delusion that he couldn't see the cliff edge he was sprinting toward. The inevitable happened on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a major project at work when my phone buzzed. It was Leo. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. They did it, he said. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its previous bravado. They actually did it. They fired me. I closed my eyes, leaning my head against the cool wall. There was no "I told you so" in me, just a vast, empty canyon of sorrow and dread. "Leo, I'm so sorry," I whispered. "Come home, just come home." I had to turn in my badge and my laptop, he continued, his voice cracking. They had security escort me out, after everything I've given this company, they escorted me out like a criminal. He was quiet for a moment, and then his voice returned, harder now, infused with a new, dangerous idea. "It's okay, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to sue them for everything they have. They're going to regret this." The downward spiral wasn't over. We hadn't even hit the ground yet. The idea of a lawsuit was, to me, the most insane part of the whole saga. Leo had been fired for a clear, documented, and repeated violation of company policy. He had been warned verbally and in writing. He had no case. Any rational person could see that, but Leo was no longer rational. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own making, and instead of swimming for the shore, he was determined to fight the ocean. "We can't afford a lawsuit, Leo," I told him that night. Our living room, the one I had fought to paint a soothing gray, felt like a pressure cooker. "Lawyers are incredibly expensive, and what would you even sue them for? Wrongful termination, discrimination, emotional distress." He rattled off the terms as if he'd been studying them. "They targeted me because I wouldn't conform to their soulless corporate culture. I was expressing my connection to my family." He had already been on the phone with his mother, who, far from talking sense into him, had poured fuel on the fire. Eleanor had a friend whose cousin was a lawyer, a personal injury lawyer of all things, who offered a free consultation. She saw this not as a tragedy, but as a righteous crusade. Leo, her brave soldier, had been martyred, and now it was time for retribution. "We need that money for our mortgage, for our bills," I pleaded, pulling up our joint savings account on my tablet. The numbers stared back at me, a healthy cushion we had painstakingly built over 6 years. It was our emergency fund, our down payment for a bigger house someday, our future. "This is our safety net, Leo. You can't just burn it on a lawsuit you are guaranteed to lose." "It's not burning it, it's investing in my reputation, in our justice," he declared, his eyes shining with a feverish light. "The lawyer said I have a strong case for emotional distress. He's confident." Of course, the lawyer was confident. He was a no-win, no-fee lawyer who saw a desperate man willing to empty his savings on retainer fees and preliminary costs. He was selling hope to a man who had none left. Against my every instinct, against my desperate pleas, Leo transferred a massive chunk of our savings to the lawyer's firm. The number that disappeared from our account made me feel like I couldn't breathe. It was the first real, tangible consequence of his obsession, and it was a devastating blow. The weeks that followed were a nightmare of mounting tension and financial anxiety. Leo, unemployed for the first time in his adult life, didn't look for a new job. His entire existence revolved around the lawsuit. He spent his days on the phone with the lawyer, gathering evidence, which consisted of writing down his own feelings and getting a signed affidavit from his mother about the necklace's sentimental value. He was busy, but he was busy building a house of cards in a hurricane. The bills started to pile up. I was working extra freelance projects at night, my eyes gritty with exhaustion, just to make sure our mortgage was paid. The noise-canceling headphones he had bought me for my birthday became my only solace. I would put them on and try to block out the sound of my husband in the next room, talking animatedly about depositions and discovery, living in a fantasy world while our real one crumbled around us. Our arguments became more frequent and more bitter. Money is a terrible, efficient poison in a relationship. Every grocery bill, every utility payment became a source of conflict. "Maybe we shouldn't have gotten the organic strawberries this week," he'd say, looking at the receipt with a critical eye. "Maybe you shouldn't have given $10,000 of our money to a lawyer for a lost cause." I'd snap back, my nerves frayed beyond repair. The day of the summary judgment hearing arrived. Leo put on his best suit, the same one he was fired in, and this time he left the necklace at home. He seemed to think this was a sign of his reasonableness. He was confident, expectant. I stayed home, unable to watch the train wreck in person. I just paced the floors of our house, waiting. As the call came in the early afternoon, it was Leo's. I answered on the first ring. I didn't even say hello. "We lost," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "The judge dismissed the case, said it was frivolous. The company is countersuing us for their legal fees." I sank onto the bottom step of our staircase, the phone slipping from my sweaty palm. It clattered to the floor. We hadn't just lost the lawsuit, we had lost everything. The last of our savings would be wiped out. We would be in debt to his former company, the Safet. Ynet was gone, the house of cards had been blown away, and the hurricane was making landfall directly over our home. I sat there for a long time in the crushing silence, realizing that the man I had married had not only destroyed his own life, but had just finished destroying mine, too. The aftermath of the failed lawsuit was a quiet, suffocating apocalypse. The finality of the judge's decision didn't bring Leo clarity, it plunged him into a dark, bitter despair. The man who had been animated by a righteous, albeit delusional, fury was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out shell, a ghost haunting the hallways of a house we could no longer afford. He stopped leaving the house altogether. He'd sleep until noon, then wander into the living room and sit on the couch, staring at the blank television screen for hours. The confident, ambitious man I married had vanished. He didn't look for jobs, he didn't help with chores. He just existed, a black hole of misery absorbing all the light and energy in our home. At first, I tried to be compassionate. I knew he was hurting, that his ego was shattered. I brought him food, I encouraged him to talk to someone, I reminded him that we still had each other. "We can get through this, Leo," I'd say, sitting beside him on the couch. "It's a huge setback, but we're a team, we can rebuild." He would just shake his head, not even looking at me. "You don't get it," he'd murmur, "it's all gone." The financial reality crashed down on us hard and fast. The letter from his ex-company's lawyers arrived, demanding payment for their legal fees. It was a staggering amount. We had to sell my car, a reliable sedan I loved, just to cover a portion of it. We cashed out the few investments we had left. Our savings account was a barren wasteland. I was working every hour I could, my design work becoming a frantic, desperate scramble to keep us afloat. And then the blame started. It began subtly with small, passive-aggressive comments. "I just can't stop thinking," he said one evening, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, "that if we had just been a united front, they wouldn't have dared to treat me this way." "I stopped chopping vegetables for dinner. What does that mean, Leo?" "It means that from the very beginning you sided with them," he said, his voice quiet but dripping with accusation. "You thought the necklace was ugly, you thought I was being ridiculous. They could probably sense it, the lack of support from my own wife. I was stunned. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to protect your job, our life. I was the only one living in reality." That was the first of many such conversations. His logic began to twist and contort in ways that were truly terrifying. He was rewriting history, recasting me as the villain of his tragedy. His mother, who now only spoke to me in clipped, disappointed tones, was no doubt reinforcing this narrative in their daily phone calls. The breaking point, the moment I knew something was irrevocably broken, came about a month after we lost the lawsuit. I came home, exhausted after a 12-hour workday, to find him in our bedroom. He was holding the necklace. He hadn't touched it since the day he was fired. "I've been thinking about this," he said, his voice eerily calm. He looked up at me, his eyes cold and empty. "And I've finally figured it out. This is all your fault." I just stared at him, my exhaustion evaporating, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. "My fault?" "Yes, your fault," he repeated, his voice gaining strength. "This was a gift for you, a sacred family heirloom, and you rejected it. You looked at it with disgust, you hid it away in a box, you embarrassed my mother, and you embarrassed me." He stood up and began to pace, the necklace dangling from his hand like a pendulum. "I had to wear it, don't you see? I had to show my mother that her gift was valued, that her history meant something to this family, even if it didn't mean anything to you. I had to restore her honor because you trampled on it." My jaw was on the floor. It was the most absurd, self-serving, delusional piece of reasoning I had ever heard. So I wore it, he continued, his voice rising to a fever pitch. I wore it for my mother, I wore it for this family. And you, instead of understanding the sacrifice I was making, you undermined me at every turn. You told me I was unprofessional. You begged me to stop. You filled my head with doubt and fear. If you had just supported me, if you had just said, yes, Leo, you're doing the right thing, I would have had the strength to face them down. But your weakness made me weak. Your lack of faith is what caused me to lose my job. He was practically shouting now, his face red, his finger pointed at me. And the lawsuit, I wouldn't have even needed to sue if you had been on my side. But you were negative, you were scared, you poisoned the whole thing with your pessimism. You caused this, Clara, all of it, you lost my job, yo. You lost our money, you destroyed our life. I didn't say anything, I couldn't, I was looking at a complete stranger. The loving, logical man I had built a life with was gone, replaced by this bitter, hateful creature who had meticulously constructed a fantasy world in which he was the blameless victim and I was the master architect of his ruin. The silence in the room was thick with his toxic accusations. And in that silence, I felt something inside me die, my hope, my compassion, my love for him. All of it withered away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. The problem was never the necklace, the problem was him. I slept on the couch that night, not because he kicked me out of the bedroom, but because I couldn't bear to be near him. I lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness of the living room I had once loved, replaying his words in my head. You caused this, you destroyed our life, every accusation was a sharp stone, and I realized he had been hurling them at me for months, just in smaller, more subtle ways. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, this was who he had become. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a year. The fear was gone, the desperation was gone. All that remained was a quiet, resolute calm. I knew what I had to do. While he slept, I packed a bag. I took only my clothes, my work essentials, and the noise-canceling headphones he had given me for my birthday, a relic from a time when he was a man who knew me. I called my boss, explained I had a personal emergency, and took the day off. I called my best friend who, without asking questions, told me her spare room was mine for as long as I needed it. I transferred half of the meager funds left in our joint checking account, my half of my last paycheck into my personal account. Each action was deliberate, a brick being laid for my new life. Leo finally emerged from the bedroom around noon, looking rumpled and sullen. He saw my suitcase by the door and his face clouded with confusion. "What's that? Are you going somewhere?" "I'm leaving you, Leo," I said. My voice was even steady. There were no tears, no anger, just fact. He blinked, processing the words. Then he scoffed, a bitter, dismissive sound. "Oh, right, you're leaving me. After you've ruined everything, you're just going to walk out? You're going to abandon me when I'm at my lowest point?" I sat down on the arm of the sofa, forcing myself to look him directly in the eye. "No, Leo, I'm not abandoning you at your lowest point. I am saving myself from the man who created it." I stood up and began to walk through the timeline of our destruction, my voice never rising. "Let us be very clear about what happened here because it seems you've forgotten. My birthday necklace was a gift to me. You became obsessed with it. That was your choice." "I had to," he started to interrupt. "No," I said, holding up a hand. "You don't get to speak, you've said enough. You chose to wear that necklace to your very conservative job. No one forced you. You chose to ignore a verbal warning from HR. You chose to ignore a formal written warning. And when you were inevitably fired for your own actions, you chose to sue a multi-million-dollar corporation with an ironclad case against you, against my explicit advice." I took a breath, letting the words hang in the air. "And you chose to burn through our entire life savings on that fool's errand. And when you lost, when your fantasy collapsed, you chose to sit on this couch and surrender. And worst of all, you chose to blame me for every single one of those choices." Tears were now welling in his eyes. They weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of self-pity. "But I did it for my mother, for the family." "You did it for yourself, Leo," I said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place for me. "You have always been so terrified of disappointing your mother that you would rather burn down your own life than tell her no. The necklace wasn't about her honor, it was about your fear, and you are so desperate not to face that fear, not to take responsibility for the consequences that you needed someone else to blame, and you chose me." I walked over to my suitcase and picked it up. So you're right, I am leaving, but it's not because we lost the money or because you lost your job. I would have stood by you through all of that if you had just been a partner to me. I'm leaving because you are a man who looks at the ruins of his own making and points a finger at his wife. I cannot and will not spend my life with a man like that. I will not be the scapegoat for your weakness. He just stood there speechless as the reality of the situation finally seemed to dawn on him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he had no argument, no twisted logic to offer. I walked to the door and paused with my hand on the knob. I hope one day you find the courage to look in the mirror, Leos. I truly do. But I won't be here when you do. I walked out and closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing the final, merciful end to our marriage. Driving away from the home we had built together, I felt a profound wave of sadness for the man I had loved and the future we had lost. But underneath the sadness, for the first time in a very long time, there was a tiny, fragile glimmer of hope. I was free. The weight was gone. It was just me now, and for the first time in forever, that felt like enough. A message to the audience. If you're listening to this, maybe you see parts of your own life in my story. Not the crazy specifics about a necklace, but the feeling of being blamed for someone else's choices. It's a slow poison, that blame. It makes you question your own reality. For the longest time, I thought if I could just be more patient, more understanding, or say the right thing, I could fix him. But I've learned you can't fix someone who is determined to see you as the problem. Sometimes the strongest and most loving thing you can do is to save yourself. If my story teaches you anything, I hope it's that you are not responsible for another person's self-destruction, and you have every right to walk away from the fire before you get burned, too.